in your interest.
This is India's #1 news network, and you're watching News 9. English news as it should be.
Very good morning. You're watching News 9. I'm Karthik Malhotra. The big story we are bringing for you this Monday morning. US President Donald Trump says a deal with Iran soon. States direct and indirect talks are on, and that Iran is considering the 15-point terms drawn by the United States. Also on the show, the Houthis have now entered the war in West Asia, firing shots at Israel. Threats to choke Saudi Arabia's Red Sea oil route push up Brent crude prices to top $115 a barrel. And Asian stock markets tank Monday morning with spike in oil prices as West Asia war enters its 5th week. Japan's Nikkei and South Korea's Kospi down nearly 5% before some recovery in the last 1 hour. All this and more on this edition of Morning Brief at 9. And you're watching Morning Brief at 9. First up, a quick look at all the headlines we're tracking for you this Monday morning. US President Donald Trump says the US-Israel war has effectively led to regime change in Iran, while adding he still aims to strike a deal with Tehran's new leadership. Crude prices jump yet again, with WTI topping $103 a barrel and Brent nears the $115 a barrel mark, sending Japan's Nikkei down over 5% and South Korea's Kospi sliding more than 4% amid deepening war fears. Pakistan prepares to host US-Iran talks in Islamabad as regional efforts to end the conflict intensify amid rising tensions. No Kings protests erupt across US and Europe as crowds rally against Iran war and Donald Trump's actions, with Minnesota at the center of mass demonstrations. The Houthis launched the first missile strike on Israel since Iran war began as regional tensions escalate. Israel hits Tehran and Lebanon, and fears of wider West Asia conflict grow amid diplomatic deadlock. US President Donald Trump says he has no problem with Moscow delivering oil to Cuba as the sanctioned Russian oil tanker approached the communist-ruled island on Monday. And back home, 2 more Indian-flagged LPG tankers safely crossed the Strait of Hormuz amid conflict, bringing relief as India battles severe cooking gas shortage. Meanwhile, the centre relaxes kerosene norms to allow sale through petrol pumps across states, easing supply and boosting access amid global fuel disruptions. And negotiations at the World Trade Organization collapsed without agreement to extend years-long moratorium exempting e-commerce from customs duties, marking a setback for the US and other developed economies. And let's start with the latest developments in the escalation in West Asia. Let's begin first with the US President has now said, US President Donald Trump has once again claimed that the ongoing US-Israel war on Iran has effectively led to a regime change in Tehran, even as he expressed confidence about striking a deal with the West Asian nation. Now, speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One, Trump said he believes the deal with Iran is likely, describing the situation as a turning point in leadership. He pointed to the killing of several Iranian leaders during the month-long conflict, saying the current leadership is now fundamentally different from before. Donald Trump added that the United States is now dealing with an entirely new set of leaders in Iran and described this shift as a form of regime change. His remarks suggest a new political phase in Iran conflict, even as uncertainty remains over the prospects of a formal agreement between Washington and Tehran. And staying with the crisis in West Asia, tensions in the Gulf have escalated sharply with an Iranian strike on a power facility in Kuwait, killing an Indian worker on Monday and causing significant damage to infrastructure. Kuwait's electricity ministry confirmed that a service building at a power and water desalination plant was hit, describing it as part of Iranian aggression against the country. Further details about the incident are awaited. And as regional efforts to end the conflict intensify amid rising tensions, Pakistan says it is preparing to host what it calls meaningful talks to help end the Iran conflict. The announcement comes despite Tehran accusing Washington of planning a possible military ground operation while simultaneously pushing for negotiations. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar revealed that regional foreign ministers met on Sunday to explore ways to secure an early and lasting end to the war. The discussions also focused on the possibility of US-Iran talks taking place in Islamabad in coming days.
Pakistan said on Sunday it was preparing to host meaningful talks in the coming days to end the conflict in Iran. This comes after Iran accused the U.S. of preparing a land assault while seeking negotiations. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar said he and other foreign ministers in the region met on Sunday to discuss possible ways to bring an early and permanent end to the war, as well as potential U.S.-Iran talks in Islamabad.
Pakistan will be honored to host and facilitate meaningful talks between the two sides in coming days for a comprehensive and lasting settlement of the ongoing conflict.
It was not immediately clear if the U.S. and Iran had agreed to attend. Initial discussions between Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt had focused on proposals to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to shipping, sources familiar with the matter said. Iran's effective blockade of oil and gas shipments through the strait since the U.S. and Israel began attacking the country on February 28th is spreading economic pain around the world. Washington said last week it had offered a 15-point ceasefire plan with a proposal to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and restrict Iran's nuclear program. Tehran has rejected the proposal and put forward alternatives of its own. An Israeli official said Israel would continue carrying out strikes against Iran on what were described as military targets, adding there was no intention to scale back the campaign ahead of any possible talks between Washington and Tehran.
And US President Donald Trump said Iran is, to quote him, not the bully anymore, and urged it to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, even referring to it as the Strait of Trump. Meanwhile, the United Nations announced it is setting up a task force to ensure trade continues through the crucial waterway. The UN warned that any prolonged disruption due to the Iran conflict could trigger global food shortages and deepen humanitarian crisis worldwide.
We're crushing Iran's currently as we speak. I just looked. We had another big day. We hit them. They don't know what's happening. Remember this. They lied about 3 days ago. I said, yeah, we're negotiating with Israel. We are not negotiating. They're being hit so hard. Anybody would be negotiating. They are negotiating. They're begging to make a deal. They're begging to make a deal. Turned out I was right. They were negotiating, which they admitted 2 days later. And in order to make up for their misstatement, they said, we're going to send you 8 ships of oil. And the following day I saw, this is 2 days ago, I saw on one of the networks, very strange, there were 8 ships of oil coming out of Iran. And then they actually said, we're going to add an extra 2. And they added an extra 2, so we had 10 ships. And then people realized we were actually negotiating. We're negotiating now, and it'd be great if we could do something, but they have to open it up. They have to open up the Strait of Hormuz.
Meanwhile, Iran says it is ready to respond to any U.S. ground offensive, accusing Washington of preparing for military action even while pursuing negotiations. In a message to the nation, Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Ghalibaf said Tehran will not back down, adding that as long as the U.S. seeks Iran's surrender, the country will never accept humiliation. Take a look.
Iran said on Sunday that it was ready to respond to a ground attack. That's as it accused the US of preparing a land assault even as it sought negotiations. In a message to the nation, Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf, said that as long as the Americans seek Iran's surrender, our response is that we will never accept humiliation. Washington has dispatched thousands of Marines to the Middle East. The first 2 contingents arrived on Friday, the US military said, aboard an amphibious assault ship. The Washington Post quoted US officials as saying the Pentagon was preparing for weeks of ground operations in Iran, though whether President Donald Trump would approve such a deployment remained uncertain. Meanwhile, talks were being held in Pakistan in a bid to end the fighting that has killed thousands of people and caused the biggest ever disruption to global energy supplies. That's after, on Saturday, Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthis launched their first attacks on Israel since the start of the conflict. Those strikes point to a potential new threat to global shipping. During the Gaza war, the Houthis hit ships in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a critical maritime choke point leading to the Suez Canal. Analysts say renewed attacks there would pile further pressure on the world economy. Iran has continued its attacks on Israel and several Gulf states, while Israel's military has also continued its relentless air assault on Iran. On Sunday, Israel said its forces had targeted Tehran's weapons manufacturing industry, including dozens of storage and production sites the day before. It also continued to hit targets in Lebanon as part of its campaign against Hezbollah. That included killing 3 Lebanese journalists in a strike on a media vehicle, Lebanon's El Manar TV reported, as well as a Lebanese soldier. Israel's military said one of the journalists had been part of a Hezbollah intelligence unit.
US Vice President J.D. Vance said the war in Iran will be short-term, adding that American forces could exit soon. Now, speaking on the Benny Show podcast, Vance said the U.S. has already achieved most of its military objectives following the joint U.S.-Israeli strikes that began in late February. He added that U.S. President Donald Trump may continue operations briefly to ensure long-term stability and avoid future conflicts.
The president and the White House have been out saying, what does the off-ramp look like in Iran?
Well, the president said, look, we've accomplished the gross majority of our military objectives. I think you can make a good argument we've accomplished all of our military objectives. The president's going to keep at it for a little while longer to ensure that once we leave, we don't have to do this again for a very, very long time. That was fundamentally the president's goal. He said, look, this country, they're threatening us in all these ways. They're still trying to build a nuclear weapon. We need to neuter them for a very, very long time, and that's the purpose. You're right. Gas prices have certainly gone up because of what's going on in the Middle East, but they're going to come down, right? This is a very, very temporary reaction to what is going to ultimately be a short-term conflict. I think the president's been very clear about this, that we're not interested in being in Iran a year down the road, 2 years down the road. We're taking care of business. We're going to be out of there soon, and gas prices are going to come back down. We stretch the social fabric that normal Americans depend on.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Washington can achieve its objectives in Iran without deploying ground troops. He added that the operation is expected to conclude within weeks, even as additional forces have been sent to the region. Speaking after meeting G7 foreign ministers in France, Rubio said the U.S. is on track or even ahead of schedule, stressing that while some work remains, the mission is progressing well and will be completed soon.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on Friday the United States could achieve its objectives in Iran without the use of any ground troops. He also said he expected the operation to conclude in a matter of weeks, despite recent deployments of additional forces to the region.
As the Department of War has consistently outlined, we are on or ahead of schedule in that operation and expect to conclude it at the appropriate time here in a matter of weeks, not months. And the progress is going very well. Obviously, we have some work to do. We have to finish the job, and we are finishing that job.
Rubio spoke to reporters after meeting with G7 foreign ministers in France to discuss the conflict launched by the U.S. and Israel late last month. He said Iran may decide to set up a tolling system for the Strait of Hormuz and insisted that European and Asian countries that benefit from trade through the waterway should contribute to efforts to secure free passage through the strait once the conflict ends. This comes on the same day that 2 Chinese container ships turned back after trying to exit the Gulf via the strait, as indicated by the green triangles in this ship tracking data, despite assurances from Iran that Chinese vessels could pass. The operator of the ships was not immediately available for comment. Iranian state media reported Friday that 3 container ships of various nationalities were turned back from the Strait of Hormuz after warnings from the Revolutionary Guard's naval force. The war and the effective closure of the waterway that about a fifth of the world's oil and gas traverses have led to a surge in oil prices as the conflict continues. Benchmark Brent futures have risen more than 50% since the war began and briefly topped $119 a barrel last week after Iran attacked energy targets across the Middle East and threatened vessels attempting to sail through the strait. Some analysts polled by Reuters said oil could hit $200 a barrel if Iranian export facilities are damaged.
Crowds gathered across the United States and Europe in massive No Kings rallies protesting the war in Iran and President Donald Trump's actions. Minnesota emerged as the epicenter with millions taking part. Thousands packed the Capitol grounds in St. Paul, many holding upside-down American flags. Music icon Bruce Springsteen headlined the event, performing Streets of Minneapolis, a tribute to victims of recent federal actions. Protests spanned from major cities like New York to small towns across the country, highlighting widespread anger over the conflict and its global impact.
We got to do something about Trump.
Making himself wealthy while taking away from regular Americans.
A lot of us didn't vote for it and don't want to be in a war and don't want to be paying high gas prices for apparently no reason with no strategy.
Dictatorships fall when people rise, and that's what we're doing.
And staying with the conflict in West Asia, now Yemen, Iran's aligned Houthis have launched missiles at Israel, marking their first such strike since the start of the Iran war and raising fears of a wider regional escalation. Now, Houthi military spokesperson said the attack involved a salvo of ballistic missiles targeting sensitive military sites in Israel, claiming the operation was successful. More details in this report.
Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthis launched missiles at Israel on Saturday, their first such attack since the start of the Iran war. The move heightens the risk that the conflict, now in its 5th week, could expand further across the region. Houthi military spokesperson Yahya Sarah said, quote, "The operation involved a salvo of ballistic missiles targeting sensitive military objectives in Israel." He added that the operation achieved its objective. Israel confirmed a missile had been fired from Yemen, but said there were no reports of casualties or damage. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian spoke to Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif ahead of Sunday's meeting with Turkish and Saudi foreign ministers to seek to ease regional tensions. But there is no sign of an immediate diplomatic breakthrough. On Saturday, Israel said it had carried out a wave of attacks on Tehran, targeting what the military said were infrastructure sites belonging to Iran's government. Iran's Red Crescent said that strikes hit civilian areas across Iran as the conflict widened, with 80 residential areas bombed since Friday night. Israel also hit targets in Lebanon, where it has resumed its war against Iran-backed Hezbollah. Lebanon's Al-Manar TV reported at least 3 Lebanese journalists were killed in a strike on a media vehicle, as well as a Lebanese soldier. Also on Saturday, U.S. Central Command released new video appearing to show U.S. military strikes on Iranian naval vessels. Reuters was not able to verify the location and date of the footage. No older version of the video was found posted online before March 28th. Iran kept up attacks after hitting an airbase in Saudi Arabia on Friday and wounding 12 U.S. military personnel, 2 of them seriously, in one of the most serious breaches of U.S. air defenses so far.
And back home, 2 more Indian-flagged LPG tankers have safely crossed the conflict-hit Strait of Hormuz, bringing the much-needed relief to India's cooking gas supply. Now, the tankers carrying a combined 94,000 tons of LPG are now headed towards Indian ports, with expected arrivals in Mumbai and New Mangalore over the next 2 days. While shipping has largely slowed, Iran recently allowed non-hostile vessels to pass under coordination. In recent days, several other Indian-flagged LPG tankers have also made it through, helping ease what is being described as one of India's worst LPG shortages in decades. Remember, the country depends on imports for nearly 60% of its LPG needs, with the majority coming from West Asia. With supply routes under pressure, India has begun sourcing LPG from alternative markets like the US and Argentina. Meanwhile, multiple Indian vessels and hundreds of seafarers remain in the region, even as authorities continue round-the-clock monitoring and evacuation efforts. Meanwhile, the government has stepped up more effort to secure fuel and gas supplies amid disruptions caused by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, while urging citizens to avoid panic buying. Authorities said petrol and diesel stocks remain adequate nationwide, with refineries operating at high capacity and retail outlets functioning normally despite temporary surges in demand triggered by rumors. To stabilize supply, the government has cut excise duty on petrol and diesel and imposed export levies on diesel and aviation fuel. In the gas sector, priority is being given to households and transport, with full allocation for PNG and CNG, while industrial supply has been partially curtailed. Efforts to boost domestic availability are also underway, including accelerating city gas distribution and increasing LNG imports. Over 2.9 lakh new PNG connections were added, with major companies pushing adoption. While LPG supplies have been impacted, deliveries remain steady, with over 55 lakh cylinders distributed daily. Officials have now urged states to monitor supplies closely, counter misinformation and ensure smooth distribution, assuring citizens there is no shortage and advising against panic buying. And the centre has eased petroleum safety and licensing norms to boost kerosene availability, allowing its sale through select petrol pumps for a limited period. The move aims to ensure access to essential fuel amid disruptions caused by the ongoing tensions. Now, under the revised rules, public sector oil companies can now distribute PDS kerosene across 21 states and union territories, including Delhi, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh and Gujarat, where supplies had earlier been phased out. Designated petrol pumps will be allowed to store and sell kerosene for household use, with limits on storage to streamline distribution. The government has also relaxed provisions under the Petroleum Rules 2002, simplifying licensing for dealers and transporters to speed up movement and last-mile delivery. Officials say the decision is intended to strengthen fuel access for households as global supply chains remain under pressure. And shifting focus to other stories now, India and the United States are looking to deepen economic and strategic ties as both nations seek to strengthen cooperation in key sectors. US Ambassador Sergio Gore described the partnership as a win-win, highlighting strong alignment between India's growth needs and American expertise. He said both countries are focusing on building strong supply chains for semiconductors and critical minerals, and welcomed India joining the US-led Pax Silica initiative aimed at securing these networks amid global competition. Now, highlighting defense ties, Gore called cooperation between the two nations the most strategically significant pillar, pointing to joint military exercises and collaboration under the Quad framework. He added that a proposed trade deal between India and the US could act as a key anchor for broader regional economic integration. Sergio Gore also emphasized growing collaboration under the US-India Compact initiative, covering areas like technology, defense and commerce, while noting that investment and trade expansion could transform the partnership. And India is also stepping up its global trade push, with Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal set to visit Canada in May as negotiations for a comprehensive trade deal gather pace. Now, India and Canada recently launched talks for a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, with both sides aiming to fast-track discussions amid and deepen business ties. Goyal is expected to lead a major Indian business delegation during his visit. On the sidelines of the WTO talks, India also backed Canada's proposal to send a high-tech business delegation, while both countries explored cooperation in areas like clean energy, nuclear power and critical minerals. Meanwhile, India is also advancing trade ties with the UK and European Union, pushing for early implementation of key agreements. And moving on now, the Reserve Bank of India has moved to tighten control over currency markets, directing banks to unwind large dollar positions, a step that could strengthen the rupee sharply when markets open. Now, under the new directive, the Reserve Bank of India has capped banks' net open dollar positions in the domestic market at $100 million per day, effectively limiting speculative bets against the Indian rupee. The move comes after the currency weakened about 4% since the start of the West Asia conflict and is aimed at reducing volatility in the forex market. Now, this is the first such intervention by the central bank in nearly 15 years. Market experts say large private and foreign banks with active trading desks may be the most impacted, and they will now have to scale back major dollar holdings built through arbitrage between domestic and offshore markets. And with that, we will slip into a very short break. A lot more coming up on the other side of the break, especially action on Asian stocks as well as Indian markets, with the Sensex once again opening 1,000 points lower than Friday's close. That and more on the other side. You're watching Morning Brief at 9.
Kushaq. Easy to love. Skoda.
At Tata Motors Commercial Vehicles, truck cabin safety begins at the design stage. We design cabins that preserve driver survival space and meet the gold standard of truck cabin safety, ECE R29.03. But we didn't stop at simulations. We tested for reality. This is real safety, delivered at the moment of impact. Tata Motors Commercial Vehicles, designing, testing and leading the future of trucking with safety at its core.
Ahead of 2026 West Bengal Assembly election, polarization in West Bengal sharpens.
TMC सरकार के जाने का काउंटडाउन शुरू हो चुका है.
There are three prime issues: citizenship, border, identity. Is it the Nirmam Sarkar versus May J. Babu?
যতই করো হামলা জিতবে কিন্তু বাংলা.
Who will retain the throne in West Bengal? Can West Bengal look beyond the muddy water of violent politics?
From the ground, the questions that matter, the voices that shape the vote. India votes only on News 9.
Welcome back. You're watching News 9. This is Morning Brief at 9. Time now to look at all the action from stock markets. We will come to Asia and India in some time, but US stocks took a sharp hit on Friday, with all three major indices closing at their lowest levels in over 7 months. The sell-off comes as the ongoing Iran war continues to weigh heavily on investor sentiment, dampening the risk appetite across global markets. The Dow Jones has now officially entered what is called the correction territory, signaling a sustained downturn from recent highs. Take a look.
U.S. stocks closed sharply lower on Friday, with the Dow dropping about 1 3/4% to confirm it is in correction territory. the S&P 500 shedding 1 2/3%, and the Nasdaq plummeting more than 2%. All three indexes suffered their fifth straight weekly decline, the longest such streak in nearly 4 years. Friday's sell-off came a day after the Nasdaq confirmed it was in correction territory, which followed the small-cap Russell 2000's correction 1 week ago. Markets on Friday took little solace from President Donald Trump's announcement that he gave Iran another 10 days to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face the destruction of its energy plants. This came after Iran rejected his proposals to end the war he launched in tandem with Israel. Alexander Morris is CEO and Chief Investment Officer at FM Investments.
Investors are now feeling what happens when war breaks out and the economic prosperity that we've enjoyed starts to be questioned. We have to put this in context with history. It's normal throughout the course of any year. We see a correction of 10% for a period of time. But I think in general, equity markets feel not so great. Bond markets feel not so great. But that's really symptom. That's not actual disease. That's really a byproduct of most investors focusing on the price of oil and becoming armchair geopoliticians, less so than the traders they used to be. If we give this some time, in a few weeks, we probably see this work itself out.
Mega caps were the biggest drag on the S&P 500, with Nvidia down more than 2% as the biggest weight, while Amazon dropped 4%. Software shares also came under renewed selling pressure, with the S&P 500 Software and Services Index closing at its lowest level since November 6, 2023. Among other movers, cruise operator Carnival slumped more than 4% after cutting its annual adjusted profit forecast. Rival Norwegian Cruise Line tumbled nearly 7%. Meanwhile, money market participants who were pricing in 2 rate cuts from the Federal Reserve before the war broke out are now expecting none. Instead, markets are now pricing in a roughly 25% chance for a rate hike at the Fed's October meeting.
Meanwhile, global oil prices surged sharply in Monday's opening trade as Iran-backed Houthis fired missiles and drones at Israel over the weekend and promised to continue attacks. The attacks have raised concerns that Houthis will disrupt shipping lanes in the Red Sea, an alternative to the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Brent crude jumped as much as 2.5%, crossing the $115 mark per barrel, while U.S. traded WTI, or the West Texas Intermediate crude, also is up by about 1.7%, hovering above the $101 per barrel range. In fact, Brent is now on track for its biggest monthly gain on record, highlighting the scale of the ongoing energy shock. Now, adding to the tension, U.S. President Donald Trump reportedly told Financial Times on Sunday that he would like to take the oil in Iran, even suggesting that Washington could seize the Karg Island, a key hub for Iran's oil exports. The scale of the oil rally is stark. Brent was trading near $72 per barrel on February 27th. This was already a spike from the trade of about $60 a barrel at the start of the year on Jan 2nd. Now, on the 27th of February at $72 a barrel, this was a day before the conflict, and has since surged as high as nearly $120 a barrel on March 18th, before now settling at about $115 a barrel as of Friday. That's up about 94% in this calendar year alone. All right, and the spike that we're seeing in oil prices is casting a very, very ugly dark red tint on Asian markets this morning. In fact, Japan and South Korea opened in extreme deep reds, and Nikkei 225, Japan's benchmark index, has now recovered some of those losses. Remember, at one point in the morning, it had touched as much as 5% down from the last trading price. Right now, it's down about 3.5% or so. Meanwhile, South Korea's Kospi is also taking a beating, down about 3% from Friday's close. Meanwhile, Taiwan's TAIEX is also down more than 1.5%, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng is down almost 1%. Let's move on now to Indian equity markets, and the Indian markets, once again, the Sensex is down. It opened the day down about 1,000 points or so. It has since recovered some of those losses, right now trading about 800 points below Friday's close. but in deep 72,000 levels, down about 1.1% or so. Nifty 50 also reflecting a similar broad sentiment, down about 1% from Friday's close. That's about 200 points down. The Nifty small cap and the mid cap registering much deeper pain this morning. In fact, the small cap 100 is down about 2.25 percentage point to about 15,200 levels. Meanwhile, look at the India Wix, India's fear gauge. The volatility index is right now at levels of about 28 or so, indicating high volatility, high fear, and the fact that markets could swing in either direction very, very sharply. Meanwhile, let's look at the Nifty 50 heat map and try and see which are the sectors which are leading this morning. Well, some relief coming from oil major Reliance Industries, which is up in trade. Remember, anytime that oil prices increase, it's good news for the refiners who are able to sell those refined products at a better market price. So Reliance, ONGC, Coal India are in the green this morning. But apart from that, pretty much every other stock on the Nifty 50 heat map in the red this morning. We've got Rohit Srivastava, founder and market strategist at IndiaCharts.com, joining us this morning. Good morning, Rohit. Well, we aren't seeing the kind of crashes that the rest of Asia, especially Japan and South Korea, are seeing today. But another day of pain in store for the Sensex and the Nifty. In fact, Sensex is down about 800 points or so. Is this primarily to do with the spike that we are seeing in the oil prices, given the fact that the Houthis are now entering the active war in West Asia, and the alternative route to the Strait of Hormuz, which is the Red Sea, also coming under threat?
Well, that's playing on our minds for sure. And it's happening at a time when the US wants to get on the table and have talks. So it does create a huge diversion in our minds. But here's an interesting fact about Asia, as I was just looking it up, while you were explaining. While there's been a gap down on most Asian markets, and maybe Japan did make a slight lower low, the rest of Asia, Taiwan, China, Korea, Singapore, Indonesia, all these markets have not made a low lower than the ones that they'd made in March. So which means that even while these markets are down, they're not breaking the March lows as yet, except for Japan. So that's an interesting feature. And similarly, then if we compare that to the Indian market, we marginally broke last week's low and are recovering from there. And if we look at our momentum indicators, they're actually starting to turn upwards, which means that the downward momentum is starting to wane. On weekly charts for the last 2 weeks, we sort of closed exactly where we opened, which is also sort of showing the downward momentum slowing down. So that's the first sign of a reversal. While we don't have a complete reversal yet, the first sign is that the downward momentum is waning. So that's a good thing. It probably indicates that the market's hoping for some kind of resolution. While it may not have happened, the Houthis attacks, etc., are good distractions in the short term, but we really need to wait for the end picture. Having said that, seasonally, our markets also tend to be down Jan, Feb, March historically, and we are at the end of that phase. So I would be a little hopeful for at least some kind of up move to show up, whether it is trend or counter trend, into the first 2 weeks of April. So slight optimism in the short term. I don't know whether it will translate into something bigger or not, but at these oversold levels, we would like to look for where there is value, from an investment standpoint.
I want to understand this term being reported in, as far as the US stock markets are concerned, that the US is now officially in what is called the correction territory. Is that one step before what is called the bear market? Are we expecting, because analysts in the US, in fact, following the US stocks, are suggesting that this correction could be a lasting correction. Is it fair to assume that the next phase of correction territory is a bear market?
Sometimes when the markets start breaking down like they were doing in January, what I told a lot of our clients is that prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So that's sort of where that comes from. When you start seeing this kind of a breakdown, we say that, okay, let's prepare, let's hedge, but let's hope that it doesn't happen. So that's the same with the US. Things look bad, but as I was also seeing this morning, that because of a lot of price changes and cost changes, there are actually earnings upgrades in the US, which is making it look like the earnings will improve over the next 2 quarters or 3 quarters. So it's pretty tricky. The hard part is that if you keep oil prices high and you don't resolve this, I think beyond mid-April or end of April, most of the economists have made it pretty clear that you're going to get a recession. So it's very important that we resolve this, in the early part of April, or at least get some signs that it's going towards resolution for that not to happen. But one thing which is become certain is that there are going to be certain shortages, whether it's in chemicals, fertilizers, and various segments of the oil and gas, pipeline or the supply chain, which are not going to come back online quickly. So that will have a secondary rub-off effect for 3 to 6 months to come. It may create some inflation in particular parts of the market. I do see the potential for agro commodity prices to remain elevated during this period. So that could be one source of inflation, which is food inflation. So these are the hidden risks, even if there is a resolution that will, still cause some trouble. But let's not, while we can say that there's a potential for this to roll over into a recession bear market, we are getting to the point where many of the markets are getting very oversold. And any positive news can also create a snapback rally. So I think we'll have time to think about it. And we can come to that conclusion, in the weeks ahead.
All right. And moving domestically now to the banking and financial stocks. And that is another interesting story which has played out since Friday, with the RBI saying that it wants to put that $100 million cap on the net open positions. And many reports out there indicating that this could mean as high as maybe a 4,000 crore rupee loss for banks cumulatively. How strong are those fears, and what does it mean for banking stocks? Because they seem to be in the red. In fact, HDFC, SBI, ICICI Bank, all down more than 1% or so in trade. Let's pull up, in fact, the banking stocks. And you've also got Axis Bank, which is down almost 3%, Kotak Bank, which is down about 2.8%. So, A, explain to our viewers what exactly is this $100 million cap that RBI wants to maintain on net open positions as far as banks are concerned, and B, what their positions on these stocks should be.
So you see, banks have a lot more leeway. Corporates have some leeway. Banks have a lot more leeway when it comes to trading the forex markets. So banks are even allowed to go into the NDF markets and take a position. Corporates also have have greater limits than individuals could have. A year back in April, the RBI did away with individual limits, which means we could go on NSE and trade in USD/INR futures up to 1 million or so. And then beyond that, you would have to show that you are a producer or an exporter of goods and services. They removed that limit, which means retail can no more participate in the currency futures in India through the NSE unless you are actually doing trade. So that was one step towards currency management. Now they've moved to the next step. They're saying even the banks now beyond 100 million exposure cannot use their limits, which were earlier much more significant. And so what most banks did is they had a trading book on currency, and they could actually go to the NDF is basically the foreign derivatives market, and even take positions there directly for liquidity reasons in different currency pairs outside of the USD/INR. So they would do a lot of currency trading. Now the RBI is saying that no, bring that liquidity back home, which essentially means they need to sell dollars, and they would get that cash back in the bank. Now that can have a positive liquidity effect also, because when you sell the dollars, you're getting cash back into the bank's books.
Right.
So that shortage of liquidity which was there, the RBI had to keep doing OMOs. That brings back some money, and the amount is being said around $40 billion worth of dollars over the next week or so need to be squared up or brought back through the banking system. So that's a good amount. It will bring currency stability.
Right.
Even if I look at the charts of USD/INR, they were very, very overbought. So there was a case for us to expect a correction, and the news is sort of
that correction has in fact come in, Rohit. In fact, the INR was trading at levels of almost $95 a barrel, 94.8 or something. This morning they have recovered drastically, and I think that positive correction is now reflecting that INR is trading at about 93.69, which is also extremely high, but relatively lower. It's a correction of about 1.3% or so.
I think it will continue. I mean, this is just day one. They've given time for the unwind. I think probably till the 8th or 9th of April, you'll continue to see that dollar unwind.
Right.
And that will, because 40 billion is a large position. And that kind of selling can bring the USD/INR down by a few more rupees, I feel. So that's going to be there. And so, yes, there is some negative impact on banking. But, when we study markets from a news flow perspective, the worst news usually comes at the bottom. So I would usually take this as a one-off hit that, banks will show in the next financial year. And so it may not even be required that they show it immediately.
Right.
But it's good for the currency side, for the macro risk getting off the table, and it does improve liquidity at the bank's end also.
Okay, so there would be liquidity improvement at the end of the banks, and meanwhile you're saying that there could be some sharp reversals as well in the first 2 weeks of April. But if history is anything to go by, and I'm looking at the short history ever since this calendar year started on the 1st of Jan, the kind of negative returns that investors are dealing with are absolutely heartbreaking, one would say, with the Nifty 50 down almost 13%, Nifty oil and gas understandably down more than 11%, but also deep impact seen on the Nifty auto, and even this morning, in fact, auto stocks are down. Mahindra & Mahindra is down about 1%. Also, it started much deeper in the red. IT continues to be this bleeding ground for investor wealth. The kind of erosion we are seeing in the IT stocks is absolutely reaching a point where investors are losing all confidence in India's IT story ever recovering. Similar sentiment even across the small cap, mid cap space. So the pointed question really is that investors who are possibly looking at the paycheck hitting their accounts on the 1st of April, if not before, what should they do? Is this the time to continue with those old SIPs that they've been holding on to, or is this the time to actually go after some quality stocks, pause those SIPs, buy those quality stocks and stay invested for some time?
Well, SIPs are for a purpose that you continue to invest over time through ups and downs so that you average out at a better level. And it's also for people who have a smaller income source and are only allocating a certain percentage of that to investing. So it's different from lump sum investing. So when it comes to lump sum investing, of course, January was a good time to hedge, which is what we recommended. But if somebody asks me now at the end of March, should I be getting out? My answer would be no. Let's figure it out first, because you've already had a significant fall. I mean, the bank index, as we were speaking, is down 15% over the last 1 month since the war started. So we've already had a pretty deep cut. And at these levels, yes, you would be looking for bargains, especially where there is value. I mean, just the auto index, for example, while it's down, we can also argue that it's sort of making a triple bottom because it's touched this level of 23,800 the third time, I think, over the last 2 weeks. And so is it really breaking down? Similarly, IT stocks, I'm not a long-term fan of IT stocks, but I can say that the correction in IT stocks looks at the fag end because they're not falling anymore with the market. That's something you can even see in, say, stocks like Reliance Industries. It's not falling anymore with the market, meaning it's not making a new low, while the markets are making new lows since almost the 4th of March. So these are early signs that, various stocks now don't want to fall anymore. And when that starts happening, then it's not probably the right time now to be selling. That opportunity to sell and get out is gone. What we would do is wait for the markets to stabilize, rebound, and then reassess. The question you asked me in the beginning, is there a recession risk? Is there a bigger bear market risk? I think we have time to reassess that.
Okay.
But there are value plays in certain segments that people can still look at.
All right. So basically what I'm hearing you say, Rohit, is while the government is saying don't panic, buy fuel, you're saying don't panic, sell stocks that you own already and maybe wait for time to tell which side the market direction will actually take. Thank you so much, Rohit, for all your input and for joining us here on News9. Always a pleasure. And with that, we will slip into another short break. A lot more coming up on the other side. Stay with News9.
The LPG shortage is now being felt across several cities in India. Our reporters travel across the country to bring you the ground reality.
It's impacting your and my kitchen.
Gas crisis hits kitchen fires. Restaurants and small businesses shutting down.
Very difficult because everything runs on LPG.
LPG cylinders are running short.
Supply shortage, hoarding or panic buying. What's the government doing to control the crisis?
So the question is whether India is prepared.
News9 ground reports.
Growing uncertainty over the availability of LPG in the national capital.
We are here at the ground. News9 will be tracking the problems of the people.
But the people that we spoke to on ground have a different story to tell.
Will be continuous coverage.
Continuous coverage on News9. In your interest.
In Kerala, politics turns tense yet again.
Kadalvindi, Makalakka Namaskaram.
Can fate and Sabrimala torpedo politics? Will corruption allegations decide the mandate?
From the ground, the questions that matter. The voices that shape the vote. India votes. Only on News9.
Welcome back. You're watching News 9 and welcome back from the break. And if you were on break, you're probably not eating that Kit Kat. That's because a truck carrying nearly 4 lakh Kit Kat bars has vanished in Europe, highlighting a much bigger problem: cargo theft across the continent. Now, food giant Nestle lost around 413,000 bars. That's nearly worth $1 million while in transit from Italy to Poland. But remember, this is just a small price of a growing crisis, a small piece of the growing crisis. A European Parliament study estimates that cargo thefts cost Europe about 8.2 billion euros annually. That's about roughly 2.5 million euros worth of goods disappearing every single day. Data from industry group Transported Asset Protection Association tracked over 1,57,000 thefts globally between the years 2022 and 2024, with actual losses likely far higher than reported. Germany remains the worst hit, with a truckload stolen every 20 minutes. A rising tactic is phantom carriers, where criminals pose as legitimate transport firms, collect goods with forged documents and vanish without force. Now, food items, especially chocolate, are prime targets due to high demand and easy resale. Add to that, the rising cocoa prices and surging retail costs have made such goods even more valuable. And now this latest Kit Kat heist seems to be well-timed as far as robberies go, because this comes in the week just ahead of Easter, where chocolate demand, in any case, is likely to be high. Moving on now, NASA is gearing up for a historic return to Moon and the deep space, with mission experts confirming they are fully ready for the Artemis II mission. The mission marks the first crewed flight under NASA's multi-billion-dollar Artemis program and the first human journey towards the Moon in over 5 decades. The 4-member crew has arrived at the Kennedy Space Center, entering the final phase of preparations. The astronauts could launch as early as April 1st. The roughly 10-day mission will send the crew on a high-speed journey around the Moon and back without landing, but pushing the boundaries of human spaceflight farther than ever before. Now, crucially, Artemis II will test key systems including life support, navigation, communication, and heat shield performance, laying the ground for future lunar landings. A major milestone in space exploration and a significant step towards humans' return to the Moon. Well, U.S. consumer sentiment slipped to a 3-month low in the month of March as the ongoing West Asia conflict continues to weigh on economic confidence. A latest survey shows that rising oil prices and financial market volatility have dampened U.S. consumer outlook on the economy. Take a look.
U.S. consumer sentiment slipped to a 3-month low in March as the war in the Middle East boosted oil prices and unleashed volatility on financial markets. The University of Michigan's surveys of consumers said Friday that the final reading of its monthly sentiment survey dropped to its lowest level since December, reflecting consumers' concerns about the economy. Oil prices have soared since the U.S. and Israel launched attacks against Iran, and gasoline prices have jumped $1 to $3.98 per gallon, according to data from AAA. Surging oil prices have sparked a stock market sell-off, which economists warned would undermine consumer spending. The survey also showed that consumer expectations for inflation over the next year jumped to 3.8% this month, from 3.4% in February. Meanwhile, money market participants, who were pricing in 2 rate cuts from the Federal Reserve this year prior to the Middle East conflict, now aren't expecting any cuts, with traders now seeing a roughly 50-50 chance of a December rate hike, according to CME's FedWatch Group.
And even as consumer prices in the U.S. rise, the United States could be preparing for an escalation in the Iran war, with reports suggesting that the Pentagon is drawing up plans for potential ground operations. Now, according to a report by the Washington Post, plans could involve raids by special operations forces as well as conventional infantry units. However, it remains unclear whether U.S. President Donald Trump will approve any such military action. The developments come as the war in Iran enters its 5th week, with Washington already stepping up its military presence in the region. The Trump administration has deployed US Marines to West Asia and is also considering sending thousands of troops from the Army's 82nd Airborne Division. And that's all we have for you on this edition of Morning Brief at 9. Thank you so much for watching. News continues as always right here on News 9.
This is India's #1 news network, and you're watching News 9. English news as it should be.
In Tamil Nadu, the battle over language returns.
ஒரே மொழி பேசுகிறோம், ஒரே எதிர்காலத்தை நோக்கி நடக்கிறோம்.
Election about identity, loyalty.
Bye bye Stalin.
Dravida model versus double engine की सरकार.
बीजेपी एनडीए की डबल इंजन सरकार बनना तय है.
The stakes are high.
From the ground, the questions that matter, the voices that shape the vote. India votes only on News 9.
What you saw me on the field and off the field is like chalk and cheese.
Is leadership acquired or leaders are born?
No guts, no glory, no pain, no gain.
My tendency is to go for magic, not for perfection.
I never give up. I like to win. If you believe